Welcome to join this seminar, Africa After the Corona Crisis, Digitalization, Culture and Freedom, hosted by the Nordic Africa Institute. My name is Jörgel Espeland. I'm a Swedish journalist and I will be moderating this seminar. During the next half hour, we will be discussing what effect the Corona crisis will have on digitalization, culture and freedom in Africa, and also what consequences restricted physical mobility will have on culture, democracy and education. On the panel, I have the honor to introduce to you Kajsa Hallberg, postdoctoral researcher at the Nordic Africa Institute and co-founder of BloggingGhana. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mantse Aryeequaye, you're director of Chale Wote Street Art Festival and joining us from Ghana and Accra. Welcome.
Thank you.
Ainehi Edoro from Nigeria, Assistant Professor of Global Black Literature, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and editor of Brittle paper. You are joining us from the US. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I would like to start by asking all of you, what are the most striking challenges looking at digitalization, culture and freedom that have followed in the path of Corona crisis? Ainehi, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. Jörgel, thanks for having us here today and for moderating the panel. I would say what has really been missed in the many months of coronavirus has been real-world events. Literature, just like any other culture, industry, depends heavily on gathering people in physical spaces. So think about festivals, book launches, workshops, and I mean, just in a matter of weeks, all of that just disappeared overnight. And this is the first time something like this is happening since I can remember. And so I would say the community, the sense of community, the cultural energy, the financial resources that we get from events like that, have really been missed since we've not been able to come together in the ways that we used to before.
Mantse, what would you like to add?
I think for us over here, it's the abruptness to which this pandemic happened, and then how everything either had to adapt or collapse. So we aren't able to gather, like Ainehi says. There's wage losses to consider, and also the almost physical tensions that a pandemic causes within a community or an area. Suddenly the way we interact has changed. People who contract the disease are stigmatized. It changes our whole social dynamic. And for me, what really stood out within the digital space is also this this contestation for truth, and how, platforms for fake news and all kinds of propaganda suddenly show up, and one has to navigate, information through all of these roadblocks, and suddenly you don't know what is true anymore, because institutions that are supposed to be providing you with facts are giving you alternative facts, So for me, it's what I noticed in the digital space is really the propaganda war that has ensued throughout the digital space, but then also like how that impacts cultural organizations who are also disseminating information and producing knowledge. Suddenly there are people's quotes that you can't use anymore. Like information has become such a porous and almost each time whatever you put out is going to be challenged, whether it's true or not.
Right.
It's that's what sticks out most, outside of the economic impacts that it has on not just cultural spaces, but on several economies across boards.
Right. Kajsa, would you like to add something?
Yeah, so maybe before I dive into the challenges, when we started planning this seminar back in May, we wanted to look at Africa after the corona crisis. So that's the title, but of course we're not there yet.
We're in the middle.
We're in the middle somehow. And of course we've seen a slower spread of COVID-19 on the African continent, perhaps for 3 reasons. It's a youthful continent, 60% are under 25, 3% are over 65, so it's a very different demographic. Africans also have a limited mobility compared to people in other places because of poor roads and transport sector with limitations, maybe except for South Africa, and of course there we have seen a larger spread. I think also previous experiences with epidemics has made Africa a bit more prepared. But that said, of course, the shutdown has been unprecedented. Like Ainehi was saying, it's all these events missing, borders are completely closed, have only recently started to open. There's been military presence, curfews, schools and university closures almost across board. So the cultural sector has been extremely hard hit together with education. So lives, I would say the challenges, lives have become smaller.
And if we take these challenges and these changes a little bit more to specific and personal levels, and if we start in Accra, Mantse, you are one of you are the director of the Chale Wote Street Art Festival in Accra, and normally it draws thousands of spectators and participants. But tell us, what happened this year?
We could not assemble like we usually do. We're talking between 70 to 80,000 people within the 3-mile radius. And none of that could happen, because we had to follow the health protocol. So the festival went virtual inside a 16th century slave fort, Usher Fort. And that changed how people interact with the festival completely. We were not allowed to let the public into the fort. It was just basically the producers and the artists and beaming it live throughout our platforms and social media. So then, there's an extended impact and an extended reach within the digital space, which is okay. But then also it means that the people who directly benefit, who directly interact with the festival physically are cut off. It also means that people who do not have internet are unable to participate, and the festival is built around a more physical, all-access framework. So people from all walks of life are able to participate. But by so doing, by event of the pandemic, all of this is unable to happen. Everything moves into the digital space. And but also, I would like to say that I don't think that most people were worried about not being on the internet during the pandemic. I think that people were more interested in sustaining their day-to-day lives, and missing the festival and also the economic benefits that comes to the city. They might have lost that, but I also feel like it forced us to sort of redesign the festival and then find other ways of making the people within the city also interact with the festival in a way that they usually wouldn't, in much more smaller silos instead of like setting up, this grand thing that we usually do. So we also have a call and response culture. So people interact with processions, people interact with installations, people interact very directly with all the art. Now that interaction has to be digital. you know, and it's different, you know, having to experience something through a screen and not being able to physically be present or physically touch and experience whatever it is. So it does change, you know, how people perceive the festival and also how they participate in it. But on the large scale, I feel like the pandemic, you know, showed us what was really important. And yes, culture is important, but I also feel like people were more interested in sustaining their livelihoods and feeding their families.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Ainehi, if we move a bit to the literary scene, Brittle paper that you founded in 2010 fully focuses on African literature. And in what way do you think that the corona crisis has affected the African literary scene?
I would say in two major ways. So first, it's sort of changed the rhythm of literary culture. So typically every year the African literary scene globally is anchored around key festivals, and many of them were cancelled or either moved online. So for example, the African Book Festival in Berlin had to be cancelled, and the entire global community was looking forward to that particular festival because for the first time, it was given a platform to Lusophone African literature. So African literature centered on Portuguese language, and it was supposed to be this watershed moment. And they had curated an amazing list of writers all over the world and all over the continent, and all of that had to cease overnight. And then Aryeequaye Festival, which is arguably one of Africa's biggest and most prestigious literary festivals held in Lagos, in Nigeria, has moved online. And due to a partnership with Google, they are being able to really launch a powerful online version of the site. But still, that's all going to feel different because Aryeequaye Festival has always been about experiencing Nigeria, experiencing Lagos, and really witnessing this beautiful moment in which writers from around the world and the continent come together and think about African books and literary culture. So all of that has really impacted the literary scene. And then also just in terms of the cycle of publishing, you know, there were all these books that everyone was looking forward to seeing this year. Imbolo Mboe is the Cameroonian novelist whose first book was acquired for $1 million a few years ago. It made a huge splash. So in a sense, the community was really looking forward to her second book coming out. And that has had to be postponed till next year. And the South African sci-fi writer, Lauren Buchers, she came out with a novel this year, Motherland. There were high hopes around the novel, but it was published right in the thick of the lockdown, and it sort of fizzled out, you know? But I would say that in spite of this somewhat negative impact of the corona crisis, there have also been positives in the sense that we've seen the African literary culture kind of reimagine what community is. So over the months, there's been an increase in digital content around African literature. And don't get me wrong, African literary industry has been very good about leveraging social media. In fact, better than many Western literary industries. But it's just that since the virus hit, we've noticed that there's much more presence of African literature on social media. Authors are being more open with sharing aspects of their lives. Publicists are being very creative about leveraging the technology and the culture for connecting readers and writers. And we've also seen an increase in video content, right? In the sense that people are thinking their work beyond text in ways that they didn't before. And so in as much as, there have been some changes that are less than savory, I think that it's also opening up new ways of thinking of literary community and also new ways of creating knowledge around African literature within the digital space.
Right. So maybe even a larger spread and reaching out to a larger audience with the digital?
Yes, definitely.
Right, right. And Kajsa, your research has recently centered around digitalization and challenges for higher education in Africa. And from that perspective, what challenges has the corona crisis brought?
Well, so schools and universities closed, and they closed fast. So teachers had very little time for preparation, they didn't get training, equipment.
as well. Sorry. Ainehi, what do you say?
I think the coronavirus crisis has been a problem, for politics everywhere. And thinking about the way that the digital has impacted it, to me, is probably more urgent than the inability or the difficulty of gathering in physical spaces. That the danger to democracy, to me right now, is less the fact that people are restricted in their ability to meet physically, and more in the ways that digital culture and technology itself has really reshaped how we enact civic discourse. The impossibility of listening, of hearing what the other person is saying, the difficulty of actually disagreeing in constructive ways. And the fact that the more expansive and pervasive that social media specifically gets, the more difficult it is to find a space outside of it to have any kind of meaningful political exchange. So I don't know what the future holds. If, for example, as you find in the US, something as simple as a public health crisis could become so heavily politicized, and for digital technology and spaces to be the site of this politicization, it just tells you if we can fight over a virus, what else, are we capable of disagreeing about in ways that are unproductive?
We've been talking a little bit about how different Africa, US and Europe has tackled the crisis, and I want to keep with you a little bit, Ainehi. What do you think that we can learn from Africa when it comes to how to tackle a crisis like this?
I can speak specifically for Nigeria because we went through the Ebola crisis, and Nigeria did an amazing job of curtailing this virus. And, over the years, lots of lessons have been learned. And one of it is that government and the press have to come together to give clear messages to people, and that governments have to depend a lot on grassroots mechanisms, so churches, mosques, marketplaces. Governments have to figure out a way to really get the people together, get them invested in the urgency of protecting their lives and staying safe. And that you then see why a vibrant, healthy political space is important. This is different from what is happening here where I live in the US, where, all kinds of interests in the country have hijacked this clear public health crisis, and it's been politicized to the extent that citizens don't know what to do, And that, so I feel like the US should sit down and read Nigeria's manual on how to handle public health crisis. Not so much in the technological aspects of it, but in the political work that you have to do, the cultural work you have to do, the kind of population mobilization work you have to do in order to actually handle a public health crisis.
Very, very good. Thank you for that. We need to round off, so time goes quickly. Just very briefly, looking into the future, what conclusions can we draw from your research and work when it comes to digitalization, culture and freedom after the corona crisis? What developments do you foresee in Africa? Kajsa, do you want to start?
Yes, so I think definitely that access to internet is a big issue, but it's not solved by that. Just like Ainehi was saying, how we interact on these platforms and also questioning the platforms as such. Facebook, for instance, is providing a free version on the African continent in many countries. And what does that mean for the power?
Right. Yeah. Very, very briefly, Ainehi?
Just as Kajsa said, I hope that we find more meaningful ways to exist in these spaces, in digital spaces, and figure out concrete ways that it can actually help to make us into better civic individuals.
Right. And Mantse, you get the last very brief word.
I think that African languages are going to dominate the internet in the very near, I don't want to say future. It's already happening. I do think that we are going to have to find more creative ways of negotiating the internet space, also creating platforms and technology that are wired in our languages that will help to, one, extend the knowledge production base, but then also extend deeper ways of participating.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I'm sorry we have to go. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for participating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.